Okay, hello everybody. It's good you came in such a big group. I have a question here for you. Who in this room knows more than 3 other people right now? More than 3 other people in this group. Who knows more than 3 other people? Okay. So we don't know each other that much. Yeah. It's something I wanted to know at the beginning because this is a Rust Meetup that didn't happen since, I don't know, 2017. Then we had one, but in another group, so it wasn't connected with this Rust Prague Meetup group. So I am glad you came here, and I would like to open the question of what we can do with the Rust community here in Prague and in Czech Republic. Who is from, or who lives in Prague, or like up to 50 kilometers or something? Okay. Who came from far from Prague? Quite a few people. Okay. Michal, how far is it?
From this south part of Prague, it's like 70 kilometers.
Okay. Okay, I'm also quite near. I'm like 35 kilometers from here, so it's easy for me to come. And one of the questions that I would like you to think about is whether you would come next week or next quarter or after half a year or something. So we will discuss this at the end of the meetup. For the time now, I would like to present just a few things about Rust community as I see it. I'm open to any suggestions from any of you because you may know more than what I do. And then Jakub would speak about, what are you going to talk about?
Rust governance.
Rust governance.
How to contribute.
So about a project. So who in this room knows anything about how a Rust project works? Not much. Cool. So you will get some new information here. Good. So, from my point of view, I met some Rust people at conferences, like Open Out Linux Days, or even there was like 3 different talks about Rust at PyCon. Come in. So that was amazing because when you go to other language conferences and other language meetups, people do talk about Rust. There was a C++ meetup in Prague in, I think it was November. It's every month, but I'm talking about this particular one, where basically Victor, who's maybe connected online and watching us, maybe not, talked about C++ for like half of his talk and switched to Rust and continued in Rust. And that was it. So it's possible to go to conferences and talk about Rust, but we didn't have any dedicated event here in Czech Republic. So we would have to go to Berlin, for example. It's not that far. It's maybe easier than to get to Ostrava, I don't know. As for education, we have some possibilities already here. Some of the universities, like the Charles University, like what is your place?
Baňská.
Or I found out that even in Brno there's something about programming in Rust at the university. So these programs are already going. This one is something that I and Michal are working on. Michal.
Mostly you.
Mostly me, but Michal at the beginning took the harder topics. Then I watched his talks, and now I'm doing it myself because I really learned from him. So that's something that we started, and we did it 2-3 years ago. So it's the 3rd year that we're teaching Rust at Charles University in Prague. So this is something. Some private courses. Okay, this is everything from me, but if you're teaching Rust as well, even commercially, then maybe next time we want to talk about it as well as part of your talk or something. So there's already possibilities to go for a Rust training, like right here in this company, which hosts the meetup, which has like 6 different courses about Rust. So you can contact them and see what is here for you. And when I thought about starting the meetup, I wanted to talk to as many people as possible who are active in the Rust communities. So I found out about this Rust CZSK Discord community. Who's on Discord here? Some people. And who's in the Rust group? Not yet, maybe.
Not in this one, in the Rust group from Rust Foundation.
From Rust Foundation. Yeah, this is the local one, like
Czech
Czech and Slovak. I think I will put it on the meetup page later. Yeah, so the best. I'm running like a small group of programmers who are interested in many different languages, so we just discuss stuff. It's 30 of us. And there's this Telegram Rust community. So who's on Telegram? Using some groups in general. So nobody's in the Rust Telegram group, right? I prefer Discord as well. Okay, you are. You're everywhere. But you're doing very well. You helped me to start this thing, so pretty happy. So what I want from you, not now, but during the evening, is that if there are some more interesting local communities, or even global ones, but here interesting about local communities, if there's something I missed, so that we can put it somewhere together. At first, the meetup page, later, whatever suits you the best, so that we can talk, we can communicate, we can have new events like this one, or we can start something bigger if there's enough people who would attend. We can do some larger scale event as well. So that's it. We're at the Rust meetup. I'm curious about what you can tell me during the evening. So after Jakub's talk, there will be like a full-scale discussion, and we'll see what can happen next. So again, my request was for you to think about whether you would like to meet again every month or 4 times a year or something, or whether you just were curious, came here, and then want to stay home or at the office all the time. It's up to you. So I think it would be the best to give like another 5 minutes for the coffee, for some refreshments, to get to the toilet, and then Jakub will have his talk. Thank you.
Okay. So, hi, my name is Jakub Beránek, and together with Pavel, we're trying to figure out what's the current state of the Rust community in the Czech Republic. And so thank you all for coming here. We would like to figure out, this meetup is in an explorative phase, as you can see, so we would also like to know what kind of content would you like to see here. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you, what do you actually expect from a Rust meetup and what would you like to see. This talk is called Rust Governance. There are actually supposed to be two talks today. One was technical and the other one was non-technical. Guess which one had to be cancelled because the speaker got ill. Yeah, it was the technical one. So this is a non-technical talk. I hope that you will forgive me that I'm presenting about something that is not super low level or implementation or something like that. But today I will talk about the Rust project, what it is, what is it composed of, and how you can perhaps join the project, how you can contribute. But this contribution part was created very rapidly during this day because we only got the notification that the second talk will be cancelled, I think, in the morning today or something like that. Yeah, so bear with me, it will be a little bit of improvisation. So a little bit about me. I study a PhD and teach in Ostrava at the university. I work at the National Supercomputing Center, which is this crazy name. I'm interested in supercomputers, distributed systems, optimizing codes, pretty much anything that has something to do with programming. And I'm a big fan of Rust. I guess I don't have to say that, it's obvious. I started using Rust about 5 years ago, and then I started contributing to the IntelliJ Rust plugin. Is there someone here who uses the IntelliJ Rust plugin?
It's great, I'm a big admirer.
Okay. And anyone who uses Rust Analyzer? Yeah, so we're still kind of losing, but it's okay. It's a friendly competition. It's always good to have some contest. And after that, I also started contributing to the Rust project itself. I became a member of several working groups to optimize the compiler, parallelize the compiler, working group to improve the binary size of Rust programs, and since last year I'm also a member of the infrastructure team, which basically manages the infrastructure, the continuous integration, bots, release management, and so on. I could do probably 3 talks about each of those topics, but that's not going to happen today. I'm going to talk about the Rust project as a whole. So the main topic today is governance. So what is governance? What does that even mean? I tried to put it into Google, into Wikipedia, and I guess that the main definition is that it's a decision-making process. And I agree with that. That's kind of an obvious definition. But I think that an important part of that is that it's a decision-making process designed to evolve something, right? So in the context of Rust, it's basically how can we talk to each other? How can we decide and get to some conclusion how Rust should be changed? We need to come to some form of agreement between a lot of people. And this is the governance process. I think that if there was nothing to evolve, then there is nothing to, no decision should be made. If Rust was immutable from today, there would be no language changes, it would be just still the same, then we wouldn't need to make any decisions. Right? We would need to pay for the bills, for the continuous integration and crates IO, but we wouldn't need to make decisions. But Rust is constantly changing, so how can we make those decisions to decide how it will change? I will start with some kind of enumeration of how can you do governance for programming languages, because I think that there are several different templates for this. One is that you have a big company that is making all the decisions. So this is, I guess, the use case of, let's say, Kotlin or C#, where you have JetBrains or Microsoft, and the company is basically making decisions on how will the language change, right? Like you cannot just, I don't know, go to Microsoft and say that you want to add this feature to C#. I mean, you can do it, you can suggest it, but Microsoft will have the final word. Right? I think in TypeScript it's a little bit more open, but yeah, there's a company behind those languages. Then there is another approach which is used in C and famously or infamously, that depends on how you look at it, in C and C++, which is like design by committee. And this is basically, I would say it's almost the same thing as the company-backed approach, but there is more than one company, right? Like in the committee, people sit there and they are like from a lot of different companies. But in a way, it's quite similar because you just have a bunch of companies in a room together and they decide to some kind of papers and proposals, how will C++ change. Then you have governance, which is not led by a company, but by an individual. Does anyone know what does this beautiful abbreviation mean, BDFL? Yes, Benevolent Dictator for Life. It's a very, very funny abbreviation. And it basically means that there is like a single person that is in charge of the language and they make all the decisions, right? So in Python, who was the BDFL? Guido von Rossum. This is not the case anymore because he basically went crazy from this. So he decided to just relinquish his rights and leave it up to the community. In Ruby, I think it's Mats, something like this. It's his name. And yeah, so they are like dictators. They basically make all the final decisions. And then again, there is like a generalization of this approach where you don't have companies, but you have an individual, but you don't have one individual, but you have multiple individuals that cooperate together. And there is something that I have called like open RFC process. So the decisions are made by posting some kind of RFCs online, request for comments, we will talk about that. And this is the model used by Rust and I think also by Python, where you have these PEP, Python Enhancement Proposal, thank you. And this is basically quite similar to what Rust does. Right, so I'm not actually sure if there are more governance modes. These are like the 4 ones that I could think of. If you can think of more, I would be interested in like how else you could do this. So we will talk about this approach. So how did this work in Rust in its history? Because Rust is already almost 20 years old, even though it's usually not how we think about it, because like the 1.0 was released in 2015, but it's a bit old already. So how did it all work out? So in 2006, it was started as a personal project by Graydon Hoare. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He was a programmer in Mozilla. There is this like quote where he said that he basically named the language after a mushroom that was over-engineered for survival. And basically, since he was the creator of the language, he was BDFL because he was making all the decisions. Like no one else even knew that the language exists. So who else could be making those decisions? He was working on it like quietly for a few years. Then in 2010, he basically created a, I would say, quite famous presentation, which is titled "Technology from the Past Comes to Save the Future from Itself." The technology is obviously Rust and the principles used in its design. And he basically brought this to Mozilla and he said, you know, I have this cool language, I think it could be used to improve Firefox, which is obviously the main product of Mozilla, or it was at least at that date. Yeah, by the way, I will share these slides online, so I have like links inside, so you don't need to take photos of each slide or whatever. I will put it online. Also, after this, the Rust logo was designed. Fun fact: it looks like this because a lot of like the people working on Rust at the time were like cyclists, like bicycle riders. So this is like the wheel from the bicycle. So that's why the logo looks like this. When he brought it to Mozilla, there were some like pretty interested people in it, and you know, luck would have it, those people had PhD in language design. So they joined him and they started working together on Rust. maybe you know from like some blogs or some online social media names like Patrick Walton or Nico Matsakis. Especially Nico is like a very famous figure in the Rust language. He basically created the borrow checker, so you know that's his fault. Also I learned in some blog post or article that it was actually Brandon Ake, who was like the creator of JavaScript, was working in Mozilla, who got these people together. So the creator of JavaScript actually like had some role in the formation of Rust, which I find very funny. So that was 2010. These people started to cooperate. They had some mailing list, IRC, Internet Relay Chat. You can still find those archives online, and sometimes like fascinating to just go through the history of Rust. And it was like a completely different language back then. I mean, it was still a completely different language 1 year before 1.0. It was like changing all the time. Like you would write some program, and then you would go for a vacation. You come back after 2 weeks, and it didn't compile because half of the features were removed. So it was a pretty crazy time. And it was a bit too crazy for Graydon, who stepped down in 2012 as BDFL, and this led to the creation of the core team. So this was like the first, let's say, official governance structure in Rust. It was basically a group of Patrick Walton, Nico Matsakis, and these people that were working on Rust at the time. And Graydon stepped down. He was still involved, but he didn't make the decisions. In 2014, they adopted an RFC process, which was, I think, very heavily inspired by PEP, so by Python. Does anyone know what was like the first RFC created?
Was it the RFC process?
It was surprisingly not the RFC process. It was an RFC to make all structure fields private by default. I think that at the time they were like public by default, and you had keyword priv, like P-R-I-V, and you had to make them private. So it was like the opposite of what is today. But at the same day, RFC number 2 was published, and that was the definition of the RFC process. So I'm not sure why, like probably someone just made a pull request sooner, but the RFC process is not defined in the first RFC, but in the second RFC. And apparently also in the 6th RFC, they were probably making a lot of changes to it. So what is RFC? I think it's quite like known in the, let's say, IT world. It's basically a process where if you want to make a change, you write it down into some document, you put the document online. That's where the name comes from, request for comment. So this document is basically, you say, I want to change something, you put it online, and you request comments from other people. And they give you comments, and they give you hate, and they give you some proposals how to improve it, or they tell you just to delete it because it's terrible. And that's what was created in 2014. Then, of course, in 2015, Rust 1.0 was released, which was like a big milestone. And it looks like nothing was happening between those 2 years, but there was a lot of happening in Rust. Like there was an enormous push to get the stable release out, and they were doing, you know, like crazy things, like changing big parts of the language very soon before the stabilization. I think we could have a talk just about this, like these few months. I think it would be quite interesting. But anyway, at the same year, RFC 1068 was created, and that was the introduction of subteams. So the core team was basically split into multiple teams. And also what I think is interesting that RFC 1 was, or 2 was in 2014. In 2015 there was RFC 1000. So I think it's almost like 3 RFCs per day if you average out. So it was very crazy period because like every day people wrote like 3 RFCs, put them online, and they were deciding what to do. And it was crazy like this because they were making RFCs for everything. Like at the time there was like no better way how to change something. So if you had to, like, I don't know, rename one function in the standard library, you were supposed to write a 3-page document about this change, explain why we should do it, how to implement it, how we will teach this change, how it will affect the future of Rust, and then you put it online, you had a discussion about it for a month, and then you send a pull request that changed 1 line of code in the standard library. So it was a very high overhead process, and these days we don't use RFCs for this kind of trivial changes.
May I ask how many of those RFCs were approved by this time?
I think that now we're something at about 3,500. So you can see that the rate is slowing down. Like it was 1,000 in 1 year, and now in almost 10 years it was just 2,000. So
Approved or?
Well, not even approved, just posted online for comments. Actually, the number of approvals is quite, like we have 3,500 RFCs and the approved ones are maybe like 500 or something. So it's like the success change is quite small actually. Yeah. So and that also, of course, like this was like the stable release, right? So there's not that many changes to Rust these days, even though it might seem like there is, but based on this period, there is not a lot of changes to Rust these days. So that's why there is like less RFCs. This is the RFC that introduced the subteams, and basically the idea was to give like a specialized topic for each subteam, because the core team, like their head would probably explode because they had to deal with everything. And these were like the 5 initial subteams. So language cared about the design of the language, it's obvious. Library was taking care about the evolution of the standard library, but also of some popular libraries in the ecosystem, because they were like maintaining them. Compiler doesn't deal with the language, but with the implementation of the like one true compiler, the one we all use and love, Rust. Then there was a team for tooling and infrastructure, and the moderation team. And all those 5 tools basically still exist, teams still exist today. These 2 teams are split now, and there are like more teams, but those are like the, not core teams, or the name is taken, but like the foundational teams of Rust. Then I have a big skip. In those 5 years, I didn't find anything really interesting changing to the Rust governance. Those 5 teams were existing, some changes were being made using RFCs and so on. And then in 2020, because of COVID and some other things, there was a big change in Mozilla. So why is Mozilla interesting? Well, Mozilla was kind of sponsoring Rust development over all these years. Like they didn't have like direct influence on it. It wasn't like Microsoft, but they were basically paying people to work on Rust, to design the language. And in this year, they had big layoffs. I think they laid out like 1/4 of all the employees, which is of course a big deal. And this was like a big worry for Rust. Like everyone was asking, you know, Rust is a Mozilla project, what will happen to it? Now they laid off all the people, so Rust will die and so on. So we already know that Rust didn't die, luckily. What happened instead is that the core team started planning to create something called the Rust Foundation, which you might have heard of, that something like that exists. And this was created soon after, a few months after that. This is the first blog post on the Rust Foundation blog, where they announced that Rust Foundation would exist. And at the beginning, the Rust Foundation was basically led by the members of the core team. So Ashley Williams, also like a known figure in the Rust world, she has very nice presentations from RustConf and other conferences. She basically became the first CEO, and she was a member of the core team. And so why Rust Foundation? Like why do we need something like that? So the goals of the foundation was basically to create an official Rust entity. Right? Why do we need an official entity? Well, if you want to lead a project that has millions of programmers and users over the whole world, you need to have at least an address. Like you need to have some kind of official presence. You need to have a legal department. You need to own some domains. Like there is the rustline.org domain. Who owns it? Like a lot of Rust was basically built on the shoulders of volunteers from the whole world. Like the whole infrastructure of Rust was managed by 2 people. One of them was a student in Italy, and he was like on call for half of his life because there was just no one else taking care of it. So it was like a normal student at the university, and if anything went wrong with the Rust infrastructure, they had to call him, and he was like the one who would put out the fire. So this situation was not maintainable in the future. Also, a bank account. Like if you want to be sponsored by some companies like Microsoft or Google, how can you receive money when you don't have a bank account? Like it's hard. You just need something. Even though some people think that this is like an evil corporation and we shouldn't have anything like that, I think it's needed. Like you need money to pay people to work on Rust. And if you want money, you need to have a bank account. maybe we could use some cryptocurrencies, but I don't think anyone suggested that. So it should use this money to support the maintainers, to support infrastructure, domains, creates IO, and so on, and facilitate sponsorship. So basically, what the Rust Foundation does is that it tries to bring in companies, and those companies bring money to the table, and they pay the volunteers, the maintainers. And without the maintainers, we wouldn't have anything. Like, you couldn't use Rust because it just wouldn't exist without the maintainers. The first founding 5 companies were Mozilla, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Huawei, and later many more companies have joined. So this was the creation of the foundation. There was like a, let's say, good news, or at least for some people. And then by the end of the year, there was like a bit weird event that basically came out of nowhere. Does anyone remember this, like, how would I call it, fiasco, or the resignation of the entire moderation team? Right? So like, what is the moderation team? That's the people who are supposed to solve the conflicts within Rust. So they are supposed to ban the people that like use bad words in forums or do bad stuff. And the entire team has resigned, and they didn't basically say why. They just said, you know, we resign because we think that the core team is behaving in some bad way. But they didn't say who from the core team. They didn't say what are they doing, because I don't know. I guess they are like trying to protect the people, or I don't know. So this was like a big drama online. Of course, everyone was saying, "Oh, Rust is going down in fire because there's like problems inside." And there were problems inside, and there still are. Later, the core team basically said that they are trying to deal with those problems, and their solution to solve some problems that were obviously inside like the inner teams of the Rust project was to create a private chat where they would resolve those issues. So I don't know about you, but I think that already like this kind of solution is like we can predict that this didn't really work, because there were like obviously some groups of people within Rust that had problems with each other, and the core team solves that by creating a private chat where they would like conspire together and solve all the issues without the involvement of anyone else. So obviously this didn't really work out well, but it took some time. Next year there was like again some kind of big drama about the Rust Foundation. Maybe you remember the trademark policy. It seems so long ago, but it was in like, I don't know, April 2023, so it's not even a year. Does anyone remember this? Like reading about the trademark and all the bad stuff. So I'm not really going to go down into this, but just the Rust Foundation tried to implement some trademark policy. It was really bad, and people lashed out, and then they scrap it, and they are still talking about how they can do it, but it will take some more time. This incident with the trademark policy actually created a new language, a fork of Rust, which is called CrabLang. Does anyone remember CrabLang? Yeah, so a bunch of people basically said, we don't like this bureaucracy, we don't like these conflicts, this Rust Foundation. We will create our own language, which will be like Rust, but with 100% less bureaucracy. Obviously, it was not anything that you could take seriously, because they just forked the compiler. They did like a search and replace and changed all the mentions of Rust to crab, and then crab with B. And then they started contributing to it by basically synchronizing all the changes from the real Rust every week, and that was it. And there was no other way it could end, because you cannot run a parallel version of Rust without the maintainers. Like, you can fork it, that's fine, but if you don't have those 1,000 people that work on Rust every day, how are you going to maintain a fork? So I think that the last commit to CrabLang was like a few months ago. There is nothing happening, but it was like a message to the community that they were really unsatisfied with the trademark policy. So that was, I think, a good message, but I don't know why they had to fork the language. It caused confusion, because some people were genuinely thinking, okay, CrabLang, this is like the new big deal, I will use it. But this doesn't make sense. Like, it's just useless. And then there was another drama. There was the RustConf drama. Again, seems so long ago, but it was just a few months ago. Anyone saw this online? So this was again something that was based on like the inside interaction of the Rust teams, where basically there was a speaker, a really cool guy who is like trying to make C so much better, and he's like a super knowledgeable person, and he was also trying to help Rust by designing some new system for metaprogramming. But and they offered him a keynote talk at RustConf, like the main flagship Rust conference. And then some people in the private chat said, you know, we don't like that he will talk about this topic. I don't think it should be a keynote. And they just messaged the conference organizers that they should demote it from a keynote, and they didn't tell anyone else, which, I mean, obviously resulted in his angry response, which is completely justifiable. And it also revealed that a lot of the decisions made in Rust were basically done by a bunch of people in a private chat. So this was a very kind of unpleasant situation, and the Rust project is trying to improve, basically from this day forward, how to change the situation. So they have disbanded this private chat. They have introduced something which is called the Rust Leadership Council. And I mean, to be honest, in a way, the Leadership Council is basically the core team, but just with a new name. But there are different people there, at least some of them. And the main goal of all this is to have more transparency. Because the Rust is big. Rust is already very big, and you cannot have such a big project and make the decisions in a private chat by 5 people. So the goal of the council is to basically be fully transparent, have meetings in the open. I think you can even join those meetings, and basically try to put like better light on the Rust community, because the reputation of Rust was really damaged last year. I think it was like, if you watch social media, I think you saw all those dramas. It was not a good time. So I hope that it will be better going forward. So how does it look like today? So we have the Rust Foundation. That's like the official entity. Inside of that Rust Foundation are project directors. So these are people that basically sit on the board of the foundation. This is like the, let's say, committee on C++, some kind of people that can make decisions together. And these come from the Rust project. So these are usually members of the teams. I will show them later. And then there are member directors, and those are members of the companies. So like the leaders of the Rust Foundation are, it's not half and half, but partly companies and partly maintainers. So there is some kind of balance. It's not just managed by the companies nor by the maintainers. Then there is the Leadership Council, and that's the representative body of the whole Rust project. It has all the teams under itself, so the language team, the compiler team, and many other teams, and the representatives of each team sit on the council. And then each team has below itself a few working groups. Those are not like, well, I mean, a team versus a working group, the difference can be sometimes a bit muddy, but a working group is something that is focused on a very specific topic, let's say how to make the compiler faster. And it doesn't have a lot of like decision rights, but it is just some kind of recognition of people that work on the same topic. So I worked on compiler performance. They invited me to this working group, and it was like a thanks. You know, they express, okay, we see that you are doing some work. Let us add you to this working group so that we can recognize your efforts. There are a lot of other working groups, LVM, like 10 or more others just below the compiler team. And this whole thing on the right side, this is what is the Rust project is called. Okay, so if you see the term Rust project somewhere online, that's basically all the maintainers, all the people that take care of Rust, but it's not the Rust Foundation. Okay, so sometimes people like they merge those two things together, but these are like two separate things. Right? The foundation is some kind of legal entity, a company that supports the maintainers, and the maintainers, that's the Rust project. That's all the volunteers, all the people working on Rust.
All the people in the Rust project are volunteers.
I mean, no, some of them are paid, for example, by the foundation or by some companies. But most of them are volunteers. And it's actually not properly defined what does this mean. Like, if you ask the people inside, what is the Rust project? There is like no definition, there is no RFC. So we are still working on the proper definition so that we can tell you like what exactly is the Rust project. But the best definition I can give you that it's all the maintainers together. Okay, so if you go to the Rust website, you can find the top level teams. Those are like the most important ones: the console, the compiler team, language team, infra team, library team, and so on. This release team is actually being merged into infra, so this will disappear very soon. And there is a lot of those teams, a lot of things that need to be glued together. Over 100 teams, over 40 working groups, over almost 500 team members. So this is not like just the people that contribute to Rust. These are just the people that contribute to Rust, and they were like officially recognized by the project. And it's almost 500 of these people. I also looked at the number of actual contributors, and it's over 5,500. So like over 5,000 people have contributed to Rust, and of those, let's say 10% were added to the team, to the governance structure. How do we keep track of all this? In the history, it was done by hand. Like if you wanted to add someone, some admin, and there are I think like 2 admins for the whole project, had to go to GitHub and like set up the permissions and add you to the GitHub repositories and so on. Nowadays we have automation. So we have a repository called rustlang.team, /team. And if you want to take a look at how does the Rust governance structure look like, you can just go to this repository and examine the contents. So for each team, we have a TOML file. And if you go inside the TOML file, it defines like what is the name of the team, if it's a team or a working group, who is the leader, who are the members, and also what are the permissions. So if you want to, let's say that you create a new team and you want to give them permissions to, I don't know, merge pull request to the compiler, you just create a TOML file, you specify that they have permissions to merge pull request on the main compiler repository, you push it to the repository, you make a pull request, and then automatically there is some continuous integration process that will read this TOML file, read what is on GitHub, calculate a diff, so like what is the difference, and then it will apply the diff to apply the permissions, which is I think quite cool because it automates like the whole process. And what you can do with these permissions is that, for example, if you have permissions to merge pull request into the compiler, you can do it. It is not done directly through GitHub, like through clicking merge, but there is a merge bot which is called Bors. Did anyone hear of Bors before? Okay. Does anyone use, for example, the merge queue functionality on GitHub? Okay. So again, we could do like a separate talk about this, but just in Rust, we don't merge pull requests one by one because it takes about 3 hours to run the whole CI. So it would be too slow. So we sometimes like merge a lot of things together and then we run the test just once. I think the record is something like 22 pull requests, which happened actually 2 weeks ago because the CI was busted for 3 days. So we had to like cram everything together to get it working again. So if you have rights for Bors, you just say like, Bors, I approve this pull request, and then the Bors bot will say, okay, this commit was approved, it is in the queue, and a few hours or a few days later it will be merged into the main repository, for example, into the compiler. Okay, so all these permissions, if you can do this, if you can request a review and so on, are managed by the automation. Okay, so that was like the governance structure and how do we manage it, how is it automated, and now how do actual like changes happen. So if you want to make a change to Rust, what can you do? So it depends on which kind of change you want to do. If you want to change some implementation details in the compiler, which is actually quite easy, you need to post something which is called major change proposal, and this is basically create an issue on GitHub and say, I want to change something in the compiler, and you can say like, I will change all the 4-byte integers to 8-byte integers. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's just some kind of implementation change within the compiler. Someone else needs to come and say, yes, this is a good idea, so he will second this proposal. Then you need to wait about 2 weeks, and then you have a green light, and you can just go implement it and send a pull request, and if it's approved, it will exist within the compiler. So this is for making changes to the compiler. If you want to make a change to the standard library, you need to do something else. It's called ACP, API Change Proposal. The process is very similar, but it just has a different name. If you want to make an even smaller change, just, I don't know, modify something in the documentation or whatever, you can just do something which is called FCP, Final Comments Period. And this is basically, you send a pull request, and if it's a change that needs some agreement from the team members, they will say, okay, I agree with this, and there is, I think, 10-day period where someone else can say, no, I don't want to do this. And if no one comes within those 10 days, it will be merged. Okay, so this is some kind of like announcement that there is something going on. People from the teams can come and say no to it. And then is of course the RFC. This is like the heavyweight thing. If you really want to change something big, then you need to go to the RFC process. How does the RFC process look like? So actually, you're not supposed to just send an RFC to Rust outright. You are supposed to discuss it, for example, on Zulip, which is our chat platform, or on some Rust forum. So this is the users.rustlang.org forum. And this is called pre-RFC. So you just say, you know, I would like to make this change to Rust, and I will just discuss it on the forum so that I don't need to go through the RFC process yet. This specific RFC is for allowing deriving default on enums. So if you remember, you have an enum, you can derive default, and you can say like which variant will be the default variant. And this was implemented, I think, just 2 years ago, so it wasn't in Rust before. So the person who did this, they created this pre-RFC on the forum. Then they wrote the actual RFC. So you need to send a pull request to an RFC repository, of course. How else would you do it? Then you need to receive comments, right? It's a request for comments. We will receive some comments. So for example, someone will say that they strongly disagree with you, or they will say, please don't use this word, no one knows what it means, and things like that. Then you need to modify the RFC, right? You need to respond to the comments. If there are still any concerns, something we should change, this is a cycle. So you will go to receive comments, modify, until it's okay. Then, when it's like stabilized, that's not a good word. When it's like prepared, a vote will happen. So this kind of form will appear on GitHub, and the team members will basically decide, do I want to merge this or not? Is this a good idea or not? So you can see that some people have voted yes, some people have probably not voted at all. And I think that the rule is that the majority of the team have to agree, and
I think it's all except 3.
yeah, I think it's that the text below says that all except 2 actually now, but maybe differs from teams. But like let's say the majority or almost everyone needs to agree, and there can be any big concern, and then it is accepted. When it's accepted, it enters this FCP. This is what I've already said before. It is also used in RFCs, and again, it will be 10 days. And this is the last chance for anyone else, you know, like on weddings where they say, this is the last chance to speak up, you know, speak up now or be silent forever. So this is the same thing for RFCs. If you don't speak up within those 10 days, it will be merged.
Merged means into nightly?
Okay, so yeah, I will get to it, but
RFC will be merged.
yeah, just to clarify, so once those 10 days are finished, the RFC will be merged. Okay, so this is just the proposal. So you need to go through all this just to get some kind of acceptance from the Rust project.
Quick question: who can discuss on Zulip? Because it's quite strange that
Anyone, it's open.
So this is quite strange for me because anyone can object to anything.
So this is actually not Zulip. This is GitHub. So these are like normal GitHub comments.
Okay.
And the RFC process is done on GitHub. Like Zulip is more for like bigger discussions, and the comments are for maybe smaller concerns. But yeah, basically anyone can say in and have some concern. But of course, the most weight is on the team members. Mm-hmm. So if you're not a member, if you want to make a language change, if you are a team of the language team, your opinion is very important. If you are some random GitHub account, your opinion is still important. But if you're the only one who has a problem with the feature and all the team members are in agreement, then probably they will like just use their voting rights and you are in bad luck.
And what is the biggest, let's say, discussion in GitHub?
I think we can get there soon.
Okay.
So you wait those 10 days, the RFC is merged, then you need to go and implement the feature. So you implement the feature, you send a pull request, it gets into nightly, then it gets used by the users, and then you send another pull request where you say, I think that this is ready, it should be stabilized. Okay, so there's like a long process if you want to make a big change from the initial discussion to the stabilization. Of course, there's like that, you have profit. And for this specific RFC, and it was a very quick one, the acceptance was 4 months, the implementation and approval was just 1 month, it was quite easy. And the stabilization, they waited 9 months before they stabilized it. But for some features, it can take years, like 5 years or more. Okay, so it's not that difficult, but it can take some time to get some big change in Rust. There are also some quicker changes that you can make. So, for example, recently I did a change to cargo, and it was much easier because doing a change to cargo is like 100 times easier than making a change to Rust, like the language. Yeah, and this is like a common theme. So, has anyone tried to ever compile a Hello World binary in Rust in the release mode? Yeah, I think maybe, probably. Have you ever checked how much space does the binary take on Linux?
I did.
Yeah, it takes like almost 5 megabytes. Yeah, and that's crazy. Like if a C programmer comes to Rust and then compile Hello World in release and they see that it has 5 megabytes, they will throw out the compiler out of the window and say, you know, Rust is stupid. So we are losing users on this stupid thing. Why is it so big? Because it actually contains debug symbols. Why does it contain debug symbols when it's in release, where there should be no debug symbols? The problem is that the debug symbols are in the standard library and they are not removed by default. So unless you strip the binary, you will get a release Hello World with 5 megabytes of 4.5 megabytes of debug info from the standard library. And this is a bad thing. So I just asked, you know, why does this keeps happening? So this is Tulip. This is the Tulip interface I asked on the cargo stream. And they basically said, you know, this shouldn't be happening. That's a bad idea. Why haven't we changed it yet? And they have actually, some other people have asked the same question like 5 times over the last, I don't know, 8 years. And the answer was usually, okay, yeah, we should change it, but just no one changed it yet. So when no one does it, the only solution is just to do it. So they asked me to write a more specific proposal on the cargo GitHub. So I basically wrote like a super mini RFC, what I want to change, what is the motivation, how to implement it, and so on. The cargo team voted on it, it was accepted. I sent a pull request that implemented the change. Actually, I was not supposed to implement it before the FCP has ended, but I just did it sooner because I assumed that no one would object. So I just sent a pull request and, you know, quietly waited until the FCP ends, and it was approved. And a few days later, it was merged. So I think in the next stable release, or like it was merged like yesterday, so it will take a few weeks until this gets to stable. But release binaries in Rust will be now smaller by default. Okay, so if you are not using strip, you will get a smaller binary. And this took just, I think, like 25 days. Okay, so this is like much faster process than to make some changes to cargo than to Rust. Also, fun fact. So this is the benchmark interface of Rust, where we run on all the benchmarks of the compiler. I'm actually the main maintainer of this, so again, I would like to do like free talks on it, but maybe next time. And the fun fact is that, so doing this change has reduced the size of Hello World by 90%, which is like from 4.5 megabytes to 40 kilobytes. But it has also made the compilation of Hello World 2 times faster. So that's quite interesting. Like, how can you make the compilation 2 times faster when you're doing more work? Like you are stripping the debug info. It turns out the linker on Linux, the default linker, is like brutally slow, we're trying to do something about that. We're trying to use LLD by default, but it takes time. And so if you strip the debug info, you actually make the compilation much faster because the linker doesn't have to link it. So doing this additional work has actually sped up Hello World compilation in the release by 2 times. So that was quite funny to me. I didn't expect that this would happen. Okay, so this was an example of a much smaller, quicker change that someone can do in less than a month. The implementation pull request had, I think, 100 lines, so it wasn't anything difficult. You just need to notice something that you need to be changed. You need to ask around if someone, thinks that is a good idea, and usually also need to do it because people have a lot of work to do.
And you need to persist because usually nobody cares.
Yes.
That's the good part. If people object, you are doomed. But if nobody cares, it's just up to you to persist and bother them with it until they accept.
That's a good point. If people care, which here they cared a lot because I basically told them something that is. So how did I find about this? I implemented a tool for the benchmark suite that was measuring the binary size of Rust programs, and I thought that I had a bug in it. Because in the release mode, there were debug info. I was like, okay, so I obviously have a bug here. There cannot be any debug info, but I realized there is debug info, and it's a bug in Rust, not in my tool. And people, when they found out that this happens, they thought that it's a good idea, so they allowed me to change it.
Didn't the debug info be used by Vectorisis?
Yes. But I had a whole section about this in the proposal.
Okay.
But yeah, if you have debug info from the standard library, not from your program, it's not very useful in a nutshell. So yeah, it was basically useless anyway. You would see, okay, you have result.rs, some line, something happened, and then in my main, something crashed, but I don't know where, because there were no debug info in my binary, just from standard library. So it was pretty useless. So this was example of what happens when everything goes right, but what happens when there are conflicts. So some examples of what conflicts can arise. In 2014 there was the great int debate where basically they were trying to name the usize and esize, isize types in Rust. And these types nowadays we know them as usize, but at the time it was called uint. And there was a gazillion discussion about this, and then the core team came and they said, so we have been studying all the discussions online and we have been doing a lot of internal experiments, and in private we have decided that the best thing to do is call it uint. And people were really mad at them because they came at the last minute and they said, okay, we have new arguments, we have new data, we have experimented in private, and we will decide what to do. People got very angry, they reverted, the core team decided to revert their decision, and I think it was a good idea, usize is probably better than uint, but we could discuss that for a long time. And this created a new rule, which is called no new rational. So this is used nowadays when decisions are made in Rust, and this rule says that if you make a decision, you can only base it on things that were previously discussed online. So you cannot, if there is a RFC and you come to it and you say, okay, now we merge it because I have some new arguments and you need to trust me. So this cannot happen. This rule says you need to come and say, I merged this because this argument made a month ago by these people were the decisive factor. So you always need to refer to stuff that was already discussed before publicly. You cannot come as the team and just say that you made a decision on your own. So this was a case where the team was trying to do something and the public, they overcame their decision. But something else was happening much later in 2018. It was another big discussion how to do the F8 keyword. Does anyone remember these discussions? They were they had everything implemented. Everything about async F8 was ready, for the MVP. And the only thing that was left was what keyword to use and how to, it was just syntax. That was all that was left. Everything was ready. And they had a lot of options, the macro, the prefix version, prefix with the braces, postfix method, postfix macro, some kind of sigil crazy thing, whatever. And I remember this, and I thought that, well, it's obvious. You need to use this one. Why did I thought that they should use this one?
JavaScript?
Because it was in other languages. It was in JavaScript, it was in C#, it was in Python. I was thinking, I mean, people are avoiding Rust because it looks too strange. If we do some postfix version, it will be terrible. We need to do this. I was thinking that I'm obviously right, but I wasn't right. You know, I immediately, when they stabilized this version, and I thought that it's a terrible mistake, when I started to use it, I realized that it's just the best solution. Like, there is nothing else that they could do. This is just the best. Okay, maybe some other postfix, but the postfix version was just so much better because a lot of things, we don't have time for that. And you know, people love to discuss things. They love to write long comments on GitHub and on Zulip and say, I have these 10 arguments and these disadvantages, advantages, but I think that instead of doing that, the best thing is just to try these things. You know, just create a GitHub repository, try all the variants. It doesn't need to compile. Just write a bunch of code, take something from your code base, implement it with all these approaches that people are proposing, and you will immediately see how it looks like, how it feels like. And it's much better than discussing for 10 hours at what are the disadvantages and advantages. So they also found out that syntax is not that important. It was not worth it to discuss this for months. Your earlier question, I'm not sure if this is like the biggest discussion on GitHub, but this specific issue, which is I think one of many about the F8 syntax, has over 512, which is a nice number, of comments. So there was a lot of discussion about this. And you know, some people were convinced. You know, the orthogonality argument, so some kind of argument convinced them. They liked postfix. And then someone else immediately below that says, you know, the orthogonality argument feels unconvincing. I don't like it. It's just stupid. So, you know, you can't make everyone happy. But I think that in the end, you know, even the language team, they did a survey. So they asked the community about what variant they would like. And the postfix variant didn't win. I think the prefix variant was really the first in the survey. And then they decided to ignore that survey. Why? Because they were so sure that their solution is better, that they know better than the Rust community. And in this case, I would say that they were right. So it's not always easy to say like if like the teams are correct or the community is correct, it's just difficult to say. Also, yeah, like those quotes, yeah, there's a famous quote by Henry Ford, if he asked people what they wanted, they would say faster horses. So they asked the Rust people what they want, they said prefix await. But in reality, they wanted postfix await.
So there is a dictator.
Sorry?
So there is a dictator.
There is not one dictator, there is a group of people that have the final say, of course. Because in the end, you need to have the final word. If you don't, we would still not have await, because we would be just constantly fighting. And then people were happy. You know, I was wrong, I fought the crab, he has won. So I think a lot of people are actually happy with the final decision. And when the conflicts cannot be resolved, I think we still don't have a solution for that. There is a lot of bad stuff that happens. People burn out, they leave the project, which is, for example, what happened with the moderation team or in many other cases. And it's unclear what to do. It's still like we're trying to figure out how to handle those cases where there are conflicts that just cannot be resolved, and when even the team members, they cannot decide what to do. So this is like a to-do for all of us, how to decide what to do. And there are some thoughts on these topics by a lot of people. For example, one thing that was mentioned by Graydon, the original author of Rust, was it often happens that the people that do the most work, they get the most voting rights. Right? Like if you implement all the features if you implement a feature in the compiler and you do a lot of work in Rust, some people think that you should have like the voting rights, you should decide. But this is perhaps not always the best thing, because just the fact that you have a lot of time to work on Rust doesn't mean that you have the best ideas and that you should be making the decisions. Okay? So this is like if you had a town council and you wanted to, I don't know, build a child playground in your village, and you would attend all the council meetings and it would be constantly, with your hand raised, like hujer. Sorry for, I don't know how to translate that. This doesn't mean that you should decide. Just because you attend all the meetings, you do all the work. Okay, so this is something that you kind of need to solve. And I think the most important thing is that we need to be transparent. We need to have all the discussions in public, no private chats, because private chats just make everything worse. Okay, so if you want to get something done, just some kind of examples, if you think that you want to go through all this, how can you do it if you want to change something in Rust? The first option is to poke someone to do it. So you don't need to do everything, you can just try to ask someone, hey, can you do this? I think it's a good idea, I don't know how to do it, can you do it? So this happened to me when I was trying to optimize the compiler with some special compilation mode, doesn't matter. And I was trying to do this for like 8 months, and I wasn't really sure how to do it. I was like hitting a wall. And then I just said this great contributor, Bjorn, who is maintaining the Crane with backend, by the way. And I told him, how could I do it? Could you give me some hints, or maybe can you do it for me? And he did it. It was like 100 lines of code. It wasn't that difficult. And it improved the compiler by, sped up by 5%. It was like a big improvement, one of the biggest that we had in years. So yeah, you can just ask people and sometimes they will do it for you. Sometimes they won't. But you can help by, if you don't know how to do some change, you can also help in other ways. For example, you can summarize the current state. So often when I want to move some feature forward and I don't know how to do it, the maintainers tell me, write a document that will summarize all the discussions that happened on the feature so far, and this will help us to move forward. So for example, last year we were kind of trying to figure out how we can make Docker builds of Rust faster, because by default they are quite slow. So like no one knew what's like the current approach, the best approach. So I just sat down, wrote a 22-page document on HackMD, and it helped us to move forward. I didn't need to implement anything. I just went through all the sources, put the stuff together, and this helped the cargo team to move forward. And when nothing helps, when no one else can do it, when summarization isn't enough, when you want to make a change, the ultimate thing is just that you have to do it. It's always like the situation in, if you know Harry Potter, the prisoner of Azkaban, like when Harry is at the lake, and there are like those dementors on the other side, and he's still thinking, someone will come and save me. It was like in the future, it's complicated, but in the end he realizes, I have to do it. There is no one else, just I need to save myself. So sometimes you just need to do the things, and often it looks like this. You ask about something, and the people say it's a good idea, but no one wants to do it, so you need to do it. So you need to do it. Then you ask about something else, and again, no one has time to do it, so you need to do it. Or last year I asked, hey, what's the status of the survey? The Rust annual survey, because there were still no results published in summer. And just by asking that, a few months later, I became a member of the survey team, and I organized this year's survey. So it just happened by itself. Just no one else would dare to do it. So I asked, and I had to do it. Or a few weeks ago, I asked, hey, it could be a good idea to join Google Summer of Code, like the project of Google to bring new contributors to open source projects. And again, people said, that's a great idea. Why don't you do it? Okay, so I had to do it.
Punishment for the good deed.
Sorry?
Punishment for the good deed.
Yeah. It's sometimes it's the only way how to get stuff done. Okay. And if you want to do it, if you want to join the project, if you want to contribute, I think the best thing to do at first is just to observe what is happening. Like I spent a year on the Tulip before I sent my first message. I spent a year on the GitHub of Rust before I sent my first pull request. I was just observing, okay, these people are doing this pull request is changing the compiler, I have absolutely no idea what's going on, but it looks interesting. Okay, so I was just lurking, observing, and later started talking to people. You can go to GitHub and find some easy issues, issues with a mentor and so on. You can study, so there are like great resources online. The Rust Forge contains basically the stuff that I was talking about today, like what is the governance model, how you can do RFCs, how you can do a lot of stuff. There is a whole big book about how does the compiler work. So if you want to understand how the compiler works, which is fascinating by itself, at least to me, you can read this Rust C dev guide. It's a pretty cool document. Even if you don't want to contribute, you can just read how it works. And there is also this like a similar kind of document for the standard library. Okay, so if you want to contribute, I would start there.
Will you send us the slides?
Sorry?
Will you send
Yeah. I will. They're actually already online, and I will put on. And if you do that, maybe after some time you will get a message like this, where someone from the existing team will ask you, we like what you're doing. Would you perhaps like to join us? And you can say yes or no. Depends on you. And maybe then you can also become a member of the Rust team and member of the maintainers and the governance, but you don't even need to do that. Like just sending an issue, one pull request, it's already a very, very valuable contribution. So just any kind of contribution is really valued by our community. So please do that if you have something that you need to change or report. So yeah, the Rust project maybe doesn't need you, but it wants you, definitely wants you. I think it even needs you because it just, if you look at any curve, Rust is growing exponentially. It's causing us a lot of issues in infrastructure, at least. So we need new maintainers. We need people that will keep the project moving forward. Okay, so I'm very sorry for talking so long. I was trying to make it like 2 presentations out of 1. Sorry for that. So hopefully you learned something new. I really hope that the slides are available here. If not at this link, definitely in this repository. Maybe it's some other directory, but it should be there, I hope. So thanks for your attention, and if you have any questions, I would be glad to answer them.
There are some big companies like Google and Amazon involved. Do you think there is a danger that they will try to use their big company position to push through their agenda or something like that?
So maybe I should have a disclaimer. I'm also sponsored by by one of these companies. I mean, there is always a danger, I guess. But as long as, for example, in the foundation, there is, I think, at least 5 companies in the board. And I think that this always serves to have some kind of balance. So it's not just Google, it's not just Microsoft that is making the shots. And like Google and Microsoft are competitors, right? So they're probably not going to, let's say, like agree with everything. But actually, I would like to mention that, for example, Nico Matsakis, very known figure, he works for Amazon. But, and sometimes there are these kinds of like conspiracy theories. Okay, Amazon is paying Nico, so he will like do exactly the thing that Amazon needs. And I mean, okay, even if it happened, I mean, I'm not really sure if there's a lot of bad things about it. Like Amazon wants to make Rust better for distributed services and web servers. Like I also want to make Rust better for distributed services and web servers, right? Or I work for a company, they pay me to work on Rust, but I would also do it in my free time, I did it before. And I'm doing stuff that I like to do, that I'm changing Rust in the way how I want it. They have like no say about what I do. So I would say that there is a danger, but like my perception is that this is not what's happening in the current state of the community, let's say. I hope.
So would you say that after 2020 and the layoff of all the Rust members from Mozilla project is better? How would you compare that if you can?
I mean,
Mozilla time and
I wasn't. I only started contributing after that, so I wasn't really involved in the community, in the maintainers teams and so on before. So I cannot really compare it. I mean, it was definitely an easier time in that there was just like less users of Rust, so there was like less stuff to do. Right? Like nowadays, if you take a look at Zulip, there's just so much stuff that's going on. Like each team like even just in cargo was unmaintained for like 2 years, and there was like a huge backlog of things that needed to be done, and they are just catching up over the last year because someone started paying them, the maintainers. But I think maybe it was easier in that also the governance structure was easier, which is like, let's say, less democratic, but sometimes that moves faster. But yeah, I think it was an easier time because there was just less users, so everyone is, like, I would say a lot of people are overworked. There are like problems with burnout because it's quite, like if you work as an open source volunteer, you need to be quite careful how you manage your free time, and you can't let the work like overwhelm you because it's just so easy. I mean, I was working on compiler performance, and somehow I became the like organizer of the Rust survey and of the Google Summer of Code and of several other initiatives that have nothing to do with the compiler. I have no idea how that happened. I just started answering stuff on Zulip, but it's quite dangerous. I think I should slow down and like focus on one thing because it's very easy to, it can get out of hand quickly. So.
Yeah, if you write your own library, you automatically become the maintainer of that library, and that's the same. You just fix your own private problem, and then people start sending you like bug reports and issue requests and so on.
Yeah, it's also like important to learn how to say no. Like if you just don't have the time, you just need to say sometimes, I don't have the time, I will just, you know, well, just delay some feature, or, you know, I don't have time to fix this bug in my library, you need to wait, or you need to fix it yourself. And it's hard. I have big problems with that. I usually like answer people in the middle of the night and just try to solve all issues immediately, but it's not very healthy. So I think I should also try to do something with that and maybe slow down in this regard, because it can lead to burnout.
It's similar to remote work. I think ever since I started working remotely, it's similar to, because it's remote as well, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I work remotely also, and I mean, of course, I have to on Rust, but also in my like main job. So, yeah, that's not sometimes not very healthy. So, but you can start small. I mean, you can send an issue, and that probably won't take all of your time, unless you hit some very special issue. So, okay. So. Yeah, as I said at the beginning, if you have like any ideas about what you want to hear at these meetups, maybe something that I mentioned today, like the benchmark infrastructure, or like how does the compiler work, for example, or how you can actually download the compiler, build it, make some changes to it, or 50 other topics that I cannot just think about right now. I would like if you can like speak up or write it to, for example, one of those communities like Meetup or Discord or Telegram, so that we know like what kind of content should we prepare. I mean, I know that it was non-technical today, and you are very heroic for listening to a non-technical talk that was so long. So again, I'm sorry, but yeah, thanks for your attention, and I hope that we can maybe have some discussions now. And I think Pavel can start.
Just 5 or 10
yeah.